Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. Today I am going to talk about Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers once again. Now, just to let you know, I really don't like talking about Carol Danvers, but I find that I really have to. Just because, well, this is a comic book channel, and, well, comic books are in pretty dire straits right now because one of the big two, which is Marvel, is just pushing the boundaries of all kinds of decency as to what they're doing with their bottom line for comics. It looks like to many people that the comic industry, as we now know it, is probably going to fall apart in the next couple of years because of what Marvel is doing. And the thing is that the health of Marvel, like it or not, is tied to Captain Marvel because they decided about 6 years ago that she was going to be the figurehead for their comic company and that she was going to be the one to carry the company whether people liked it or not. And so talking about Captain Marvel indirectly is talking about whether or not the whole comic industry is going to survive. I think that's not too big a statement to make. And it is certainly, I would say, also tied to how the Marvel MCU is actually going to fare in the not so distant future. And so I'm doing this video about Captain Marvel because I've been following the things about Captain Marvel for those reasons I just stated, and it really looks to me like the time for an MCU retcon to come is now with the new Captain Marvel movie. And it is going to destroy all the old Marvel comic history, both in the MCU and then, therefore, downwards towards the movies. And all of us old comic readers who have these beautiful stories stuck in our heads from Marvel's past are just going to be completely shut out, because the entire line of comics, if it does survive, is going to have no reference to those stories whatsoever. Now, this is just supposition on my part, but I am drawing these ideas from many sources from Marvel, and it really seems like this is the direction that they're headed in, because Marvel is a part of Disney. And as I have explained in a couple of my other videos, that I see Disney as, well, they are a multi-platform campaign advertiser, because what they try to do is they try to push their movies. Okay, everything is directed towards pushing their movies, and that's what they try to do. And because the movies are their big money makers, so I see that the way that Marvel is run now is that everything in the MCU, in Marvel Studios, in Marvel Entertainment, which includes all the other things besides the movies, which includes the comics, are all just a push to get people interested in characters and to keep them in their minds so that they go see these movies. And so the movies are the end product, and everything else is just basically an advertisement to keep those characters and stories in your mind so that you will eventually go see the movies. And that's what Marvel Comics are right now. I would say that's what they are. They're just, the free magazine, basically, although they're not free, that they put out in the movie theaters so that you'll go see the next movie. That's what they are. So the thing is that you can see, if you actually follow Marvel and what's going on with the comics and all of their different advertisements, that Captain Marvel is the horse that they have backed. Okay, we can see this. I'll do it sort of, not really chronologically, but age-wise. All right, because here you have, if you follow Marvel's Twitter, which is one of the main ways that they will say advertise, that's what I would call it, advertising. One of the things they've been pushing over the last month or so, of course, is back to school supplies. Now, I mean, this is a Twitter feed that's supposed to be for Marvel Comics, and yet there's only about 10 to maybe 20% on there about actual comics. They have so many other things because they're a lifestyle brand now, so-called. And one of the things that they have out is, of course, school supplies. Now, these school supplies have been focusing on Spider-Man and Thor for the last little bit, but Now the push has really started because school is just starting. And what are they pushing in their school supplies? Well, they're pushing Captain Marvel and Marvel Rising. And if you look at all of the art for Marvel Rising, you'll see that Captain Marvel is very prominent right in the middle of everything there. She hasn't been there yet in the shorts that I have seen, but she's prominent in this story. So these are school supplies for very young kids. So they're trying to push Captain Marvel on very young kids. Kids who don't know who she is, basically. And then you move on to Marvel Rising, of course. And this is supposed to be the movie they're going to announce, I think, next week when the movie is coming out. They have been working on this movie for more than a year. They have been working on all the things that are attached to this movie, like the shorts, like the comic books. They all reflect a certain style in order to get people to see this movie. And I don't think this movie itself is the end product movie that they want people to see. I think it is softening the market so that everybody gets used to Carol Danvers, gets used to Captain Marvel, and gets used to her being the center of attention for a Marvel universe. And so this audience that they're targeting is tweens with this movie. So you got the younger kids with the school supplies. They're getting Captain Marvel pushed at them. They're getting the tweens. They're having the Captain Marvel pushed at them through this movie and the shorts and everything else that goes along with it. And so the thing is that they are all leading up to this Captain Marvel movie. Now, what does this Captain Marvel movie really look like? Well, we have some hints of what it looks like. It's not actually going to take place in the current time in the MCU. It's actually going to take place, I think it's in the 80s. And so it's going to be a prequel, basically. And it's going to focus on, of course, Captain Marvel. So we know very little about the story besides that. But there was something going on the Marvel Twitter feed, and I did listen to it, and because it's the pinned tweet that's been at the top of the Marvel Entertainment Twitter feed for the last more than a week. And it's basically a interview which Sana Amanath and another editor, the editor of Captain Marvel comics, are doing for one of their podcasts. And they're talking about the 50th anniversary of Captain Marvel. Now, I don't suggest you go listen to this, just like so many other of these interviews that I have actually suffered through. It's like watching paint dry. But when I listen to what they have to say, I listen not only to what they have to say, but how they say it and how they certainly contradict themselves in what they are saying. So this is a ridiculous interview, and they're talking about Carol Danvers through the entire thing because it's focused on her. Now, they do things like take several minutes out of about when you're 3/4 of the way through this interview. They talk about Carol's hair for several minutes and why it has to be short. And they talk about other ridiculous things, but they say stuff like they wanted to, in these new comics that are being written for Captain Marvel, which, by the way, keep on getting canceled, they wanted to make sure that they paid homage to all of that 50 years of history for Carol Danvers. But, see, that's just lip service, because when push comes to shove and a question is put to them about where readers should go to see the quintessential Captain Marvel and where should they begin to read Captain Marvel if they really don't know about her and they want to go back and read Captain Marvel stuff, what do these two people suggest? Well, they suggest you go back to 2012 to the new Captain Marvel. Basically, they're saying that you can ignore everything of Captain Marvel that came before, and you just go from 2012 onward to the Carl Manvers version of Captain Marvel. And that's all you need. And that's what they're promoting. And they have snide little comments about how Captain Marvel before that was quaint, and we really, don't want to take those stories and bring them forward because they're problematic and all these other kinds of things. So, here's the thing. This is what they're pushing in the Captain Marvel books right now. So the new Captain Marvel book, The Life of Captain Marvel, if you've seen my channel, you've seen that I've done a couple of reviews of some of these, and they're ridiculous. And they're not an actual comic book. And it doesn't appear from this interview, I would say that it's actually meant to be a comic book. Now, I actually did one for the second issue of Life of Captain Marvel, where I said, if you turned all of these, if you took all of these elements that you have in this book and turned them around so that you put them in an actual comic book order, it could actually be a story that comic book readers would like to read. But it's obvious from this interview that they don't want to do that. No, they are writing for another audience. They want to draw in an older audience, of course, and this older audience, because it looks like a Hallmark movie. So they want to bring in sort of 20-ish and 30-ish females and draw them into this Captain Marvel character, because it's a family drama and it makes no sense as a comic book. And they're talking about things in this interview about how Margaret Stohl, who is the writer, and she has been the writer for a number of Captain Marvel series, and even though they never mention this directly, that all of her series have failed miserably, yet they keep putting her on these books. Why? Because they want a specific feel to this character, because they wanted to appeal to these 20-ish, 30-ish women. That's who they wanted to appeal to, because you got the young kids, then you got the tweens, and then they want to move on to the older audience, and they're trying to soften all of the audience up for the Captain Marvel movie. And they make no bones about the fact that, yeah, she's still going to be on this book. And I'm sure that if this book, well, it's not going to be canceled. It's basically a miniseries, but they're going to keep up with this no matter how poor the sales are. And they're saying things like the fact that, the artist had researched directly the clothes that Carol's mother would wear in this flashback, or the way that New England looks in the background of this comic, which, by the way, they get completely wrong. Just to let you know, it just looks like somebody Googled what Maine looks like and took a couple of pictures and said, yeah, it's good enough for me. But so they're focusing on all of these things. They're focusing on how the clothes look. They're focusing on how the scenery looks. They're focusing on Carol's hair, and they're telling a family story, and they want this family story to be emotional. And this is what they're saying in this interview. This is what the book actually wants to be about. So they have no intention of making it into a classic comic book. They want to draw in this new audience. Now, they're drawing in the audience from the very young to, I would say, the 20s and 30-year-olds, most of them women. And the reason why they want to draw them all in is to get ready for this Captain Marvel movie. And this Captain Marvel movie, I would say, is the MCU's version of a reboot for the entire MCU. Now, it's a reboot, I would say, in a very odd way, because the thing is that, well, you've got some of these actors who don't want to play these characters anymore, and you've got some of these actors who are getting older and can't play these characters anymore, I would say. So they're going to have to do something. And obviously, from the last Avengers movie, where half the universe got killed and you have the Infinity Stones in play, they're going to have to play with time and reality in order to fix everything. And what they're going to do is, I would say, start writing new stories, starting with the Captain Marvel movie, because all of these other movies that did well, they all have reference to older comic stories. They were all iconic comic stories, and they're just a retelling of those iconic comic stories, and that's the heart of them, and they did great on those. But Captain Marvel has no iconic stories. The newer books, I mean, they sold pathetically compared to the older books where all of these iconic stories came from. And when you go back to the older books, Captain Marvel, Miss Marvel, whatever you want to call her, Warbird, when she was in the Avengers, she has no great stories of her own to tie up in a movie and to make a movie out of. So they are actually making this big push in order to sell this Captain Marvel that starts at 2012 and comes forward, and it's going to be a new Marvel story. It's basically, if it is going to reference anything from the comics, it's only going to go from 2012 forward, which is very new for Marvel Comics. And so it's going to be a new story. And so what they're trying to do is push a new story. And they're going to create a new story with Captain Marvel for the movie. And this will be the first of the new stories, because they want to cut off all of the older stories, and they want to just write new stories for the Marvel Universe. I would say this is the prep for that. They are only going to write new stories for all of their superhero movies after this point. They're going to gradually do it, possibly, but that's what their end game is. And their end game is to untether from all of that history of the Marvel Comics, and so that they can use those Marvel Comics in the way that I have been saying in the first of this video, that they're just a softener. They're just a type of advertisement to soften up the market for the actual movie that's going to come out. So it's just going to lead up to the movie in some way, which the comics, they now have hints that the comics coming out now, the new ones for Captain Marvel in the next series, is just going to be that. It's going to be a softening up for the movie. And that's all Marvel Comics is ever going to be after that point. They're going to cut off all of the history that we love, that older comic book readers love, from the Marvel Universe. They're going to cut it off, and they're going to say, okay, all of these new stories, you're just writing them in order to sell the movie that's going to come out. We'll give you enough of the movie plot so that you can drag along enough people so that they get interested in this character and go see the movie. And so that reboot that is coming, I would say, in the movies, so that it's only newer stories, is going to destroy all the history of Marvel Comics. And that is a really, really sad idea. But the way that I am looking at all of this stuff coming out from Marvel, this is what I see happening. All right. So there's my 15 minutes. If I've given you anything new to think about, hit like, hit subscribe, leave a comment, give me something new to think about. All right. I'll see you later. Bye.